We took in $600 billion and more in taxes and tariffs from China. No other president took in 10 cents, not 10 cents, not 10 cents. And no, well, we're going to be doing things. We're going to be treating people very fairly. But the word reciprocal is important, because if somebody charges us, India, we don't have to talk about own, if India charges us 100% and we charge them nothing for the same, you know, they send in a bicycle and we send them a bicycle, they charge us 100 and 200. India charges a lot. Brazil charges a lot. If they want to charge us, that's fine, but we're going to charge them the same thing.
That's a big worried thing. About tariff.
You know what? The senators, some of them aren't necessarily business people.
After President Trump threatened 100% tariffs on any country, backing away from the U.S. dollar, the dollar, funny enough, immediately rebounded, and in a big way as the world's leading currency. This after taking a 20% nosedive under the Biden-Harris administration. Trump's threatened 100% tariff would impact all BRICS nations: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and also include Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the United Arab Emirates.
Excess, we tax them, reciprocal trade. I think we should have a reciprocal trade act. If China's going to charge us $100 tariff or 100% tariff on a car, then we should say, you're going to pay 100% to us.
These specific countries, led by China, of course, are working to undermine U.S. interests and the dollar. But after President Trump's clear signal in this front, the question now is, what happens to BRICS? Will they power through, or will they bend the knee, quite like Mexico and Canada after their threatened tariffs? Joining us now to discuss is Brazilian journalist Paulo Figueiredo. Paulo, we appreciate you hopping on to discuss this. What is your ultimate reaction to these threatened tariffs from the 45th and incoming 47th president? Do you foresee him ultimately putting an end to this possible BRICS alliance, or putting a little bit more pressure on them with these possible tariffs? What is your reaction, sir?
Well, thanks for having me. I mean, it's important to realize that when we're talking about Brazil, we're talking about a country that's one of the top 10 economies in the world. Geopolitically is the most important country in the Southern Hemisphere. Brazil, sometimes Americans don't realize, but Brazil is half of South America in terms of population, territory, and GDP. So it's not any country in South America, is the country in South America. So, and I mean, Brazil is in a really bad shape right now. And this is one of the reasons why is getting closer and closer to China. So right now the country is, I would say, in the worst shape I've ever seen in my life, because we have, at the same time, we have a dual crisis, a crisis of economic instability in Brazil and also political repression, which mirrors on steroids the patterns that we see in other Latin American nations like Venezuela. So on the economic front, we have, under Lula da Silva's administration, the country has been recording unprecedented public deficit. The dollar has reached its highest historical levels against the Brazilian real today. And this is the mark of a significant deterioration from the previous economic condition that we had under Bolsonaro. So the political situation in Brazil is also very concerning, to say the least, with unprecedented political repression targeting dozens of former President Bolsonaro's, which is the right wings, the Trump of Brazil, his allies. I mean, for example, just this weekend, the four-star General Braga Neto, which was Bolsonaro's running mate on the last election, a four-star general, he was arrested, like several supporters of Bolsonaro has been in the past year. And rumors are that President Bolsonaro is going to be arrested sometime soon. So, and that's why we have Brazil making some international moves that goes against every interest of the United States. For example, 2 weeks ago, Brazil sold its largest uranium reserves to China. Brazil is actively working to weaken the dollar as the world trade within not only the BRICS, but also Mercosur, which is the economic bloc of the South American countries. Brazil is also supporting Hamas. It's probably the Hamas' strongest global ally, is allowing Iranian warships to dock in its ports. It's supporting Maduro's regime in Venezuela. I mean, it's voting against the United States in the UN and every single voting. So the situation is way worse than it sounds, and way worse from the United States than just the problem of economic tariffs and all that.
Fascinating points, obviously, Paolo. Let's focus on the economy for a second before we get to the political repressions. Is there anything that Donald Trump can do, or this incoming Trump administration can do, to sort of reel Brazil back away from its advances towards aligning itself fully with China and working towards the United States' ultimate goals? Are these tariffs the right move? Is it the proper start in your eyes? Or is it a little bit too little, too late to reel it back in?
I mean, if the U.S. tariffs Brazil, the only thing that's going to happen is that Brazil is going to get closer and closer to China. The problem is way worse than that. What makes this situation worse is that everything that's happened in Brazil happened because of the Biden administration. This is not an overstatement. The State Department of Biden effectively sponsored and guaranteed the election of Lula da Silva, the socialist that is the president of Brazil, and supported the Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes, who is the de facto dictator of Brazil. So Lula da Silva is a communist. He was the president of Brazil from 2003 to 2012, if I'm not mistaken. And during his term, during his first tenure, what happened is that for the first time in Brazil's history, China became Brazil's #1 economic partner. Guess who was the #1 before that? It was China. So the Biden administration actually sponsored the election of the guy that made China Brazil's largest economic partner. So it's a geopolitical problem. There's no way Brazil will back away from China under Lula. And remember, on the other side was Bolsonaro, which was not only called the Trump of South America, but also it was the United States' biggest ally in the Southern Hemisphere in decades, by far the biggest ally in Brazil. So, I mean, what Trump administration needs to do is to use its geopolitical and diplomatic instruments to reestablish an environment that's has political freedom, and wait for the next election in Brazil that's going to happen in a little less than 2 years, a year and a half, and hope that Bolsonaro gets back to power, which right now sounds very bad, because under Lula, there's nothing Trump can do in order to get Lula to become a supporter of the United States. Part of his political agenda is to be anti-American, and he's very open about that. And that's why it was so surprising to see the Biden administration supporting him.
Paolo, a question for you. You were talking about the political repressions that is happening in Brazil and how Lula's administration is going after allies of Bolsonaro, and how Bolsonaro could actually even face some legal consequences as well from this hostile administration. What would be the ramifications if Bolsonaro does getting arrested in some form? What would that mean for the country of Brazil and its posture in the world?
So in several senses, what we're seeing in Brazil is the same thing that we saw in the United States, but on steroids. I mean, the weaponization of the judiciary, the censorship that we saw in the United States on social media, in Brazil, we're seeing it through the courts. So Brazil has a key figure, which is that guy that has a feud with Elon Musk as well. It's the Supreme Court Justice of the country, Alexandre de Moraes. He opened investigations against pretty much every single Bolsonaro ally, including journalists, right-wing conservative journalists like myself. And Brazil has several people under political persecution right now. And we're talking about dozens and dozens of people. Like I said, even the running mate of Bolsonaro went to prison. So the expectation right now is that Bolsonaro himself can be arrested at any time. If you ask me, the only thing that's holding Moraes from actually arresting Bolsonaro is that he's waiting to see what the Trump administration will do regarding Brazil, because in the past, Congress and some figures in the Republican Party threatened Moraes and other figures in Brazil with visa cancellations, asset seizing, and all that if the human rights and political rights violation continue in Brazil. So, I mean, to answering your question, if Bolsonaro gets arrested in Brazil, that means the left will consolidate its power in South America, meaning China will have a huge ally, the biggest ally they can in the Southern Hemisphere. Like I said, from a geopolitical perspective, Brazil is number 3 food producer in the world, number 2 iron ore producer in the world. It's an energy powerhouse, produces more oil than most OPEC countries, and obviously the 6th largest population in the world. So if you think about it, people, iron, energy, and food is everything you need in a war. It's the most important assets you need to have in a war. Not only that, Brazil is also rich in some minerals like uranium, and it's sold largest uranium reserves to China. So what's happening right now is that the most important country in South America, and the country that every other country in Latin America follows, is pretty much being pushed into the direction of China. Tariffs, if you ask me, tariffs is not the way to go if you want to change the situation in Brazil.
Paulo, what is Argentina's role in this right now? Obviously, the leader in Argentina is a little bit more friendly than Lula towards the United States as of right now. Milei, what is the relationship between Brazil and Argentina at this point, and how can that play a role in shaping out South American economic policy, political situations? Does it have an effect? What does that relationship look like right now, and how does that play a role?
Javier Milei is amazing. He's doing a job that you cannot overstate. He controlled inflation. The country is growing again. He controlled the public accounts. So Argentina is in a path of growth. And Milei is also very close to former President Bolsonaro, and a big antagonist in the region of Lula. The problem is that Argentina is not that big. It is significant in terms of territory, but just to give you an idea, just one state of Brazil, Brazil has 26 states, just one of them, São Paulo, is the size of Argentina in terms of population and GDP.
Fascinating conversation. We appreciate you joining us on Fine Point on One American News. Thank you so much for your insights, sir.
Thanks for having me.